there is a distinct, silent calculation that occurs in the minds of certain individuals when a social invitation arrives. While the rest of the world prepares for the dopamine rush of a crowded room, you are already architecting your escape. You are drafting the excuse before the question is even fully asked. For decades, society has pathologized this instinct. They labeled it depression. They called it social anxiety. They whispered that something was wrong, but they were looking at the symptom, not the source. What if that urge to be alone isn't a wound, but a sophisticated biological mechanism? We are not talking about loneliness. We are talking about a brain wired for a completely different frequency of existence. A brain that doesn't just tolerate solitude, but demands it to reach its peak potential. Today, we peel back the layers of behavioral psychology to understand why you choose the silence of a room over the noise of the world. The answer isn't in your personality, it's in your neural circuitry, and it changes everything you think you know about yourself. Part 1. The biological divergence. To understand the solitary mind, we must first dismantle the archaic framework that has governed psychology for decades. For too long, the clinical world lumped every individual who sought the shadows into a single, concerning diagnostic category. They were labeled introverts at best and antisocial at worst. The implication was clear. Enjoying your own company was a precursor to pathology. A villain origin story in the making. But in 2016, the narrative shattered. A groundbreaking team of psychologists at the University of Buffalo dared to ask a question that challenged the very foundation of social psychology. What if the withdrawal from the crowd isn't driven by fear, but by preference? What if it isn't a malfunction, but a different operating system entirely? They identified a distinct behavioral trait they termed unsociability. Do not confuse this with being antisocial, which implies active hostility toward others. Do not mistake it for avoidant, which is rooted in anxiety and fear. Unsociability is something far more profound. It is the calm, confident, and non-fearful preference for one's own company. When researchers studied individuals who possessed this trait, they didn't find broken people. They found individuals who were thriving. The reason lies deep within the chemical architecture of the brain, specifically in the dopamine system. We often misunderstand dopamine as simply the pleasure chemical. In reality, it is the currency of stimulation. The extroverted brain operates on a low sensitivity model. It requires a massive influx of external stimuli. The loud laughter, the crowded room, the chaotic energy exchange, to feel a baseline of satisfaction. They are sensation seekers, starving for the rush. But the solitary brain, it is a precision instrument, highly sensitive to dopamine. Think of it in terms of spice tolerance. To feel anything, an extrovert might need to consume the entire jalapeno. The solitary mind, however, reaches its optimal level of stimulation with a single flake of red pepper. For you, the chaotic party isn't fun, it is a sensory overdose. You retreat not because you lack the capacity for connection, but because your biological threshold for stimulation has already been met. And while the world assumes that the solitary person is merely sitting there staring at a wall, modern neuroscience reveals the opposite is true. Brain imaging shows that during these moments of solitude, the prefrontal cortex, the evolutionary masterpiece of the human brain responsible for deep thinking, complex problem solving, and self-reflection, lights up with intense activity. You are not disengaged. Your brain is hosting a riot of introspection, creativity, and mental processing that simply cannot occur in the presence of others. You are not doing nothing. You are doing the heavy lifting of consciousness. Part 2. The incubator of genius. History is rarely written by committees. If we examine the architecture of human progress, we find a recurring pattern. The most profound breakthroughs did not emerge from the noise of collaboration, but from the silence of isolation. Corporate culture tries to sell us the myth of the brainstorming session, the idea that friction and noise generate sparks. But the data suggests otherwise. Studies on creativity consistently reveal that true, paradigm-shifting ideas almost never occur in crowded conference rooms or bustling coffee shops. They arrive when the noise stops. They manifest in the shower, or on a solitary walk at 2 a.m. when the rest of the world is asleep and you are the only consciousness awake. This is not a coincidence. It is a neurological necessity. The brain requires the absence of social input to process the complex output of genius. Consider the giants of intellectual history. Albert Einstein did not unravel the fabric of space-time in a group chat. Isaac Newton did not formulate the laws of gravity amidst a dinner party. They performed their most critical work alone. They understood that social interaction, no matter how pleasant, is a tax on cognitive resources. To think deeply is to be alone. Literature echoes this biological truth. Virginia Woolf did not just suggest that solitude was pleasant. She wrote an entire treatise, A Room of One's Own, declaring it a fundamental necessity for creation. She argued that without a physical and mental space separate from the demands of others, the mind cannot expand to its full capacity. Even the celebrated poet Maya Angelou, a woman of deep emotion and connection, understood this ruthless requirement. Despite owning a perfectly comfortable home, she would rent a stark, impersonal hotel room just to write. She needed to strip away the domestic reminders, the potential for interruption, the very possibility of a conversation. Why? Because she wasn't hiding. She was focusing. These individuals demonstrate that solitude is not a passive act of withdrawing from the world. It is an active state of engaging with ideas. It is the incubator where the raw data of life is processed into wisdom. When you choose to be alone, you are not doing nothing. You are stepping into the same laboratory used by history's greatest minds to build the future. Part 3. The Maslow dichotomy. However, we must pause the celebration for a critical moment of calibration. Before you fully adopt this identity, before you claim this narrative as your own, we must confront an uncomfortable truth lurking in the shadows of the psyche. There is a fundamental distinction between solitude that liberates and solitude that imprisons. We must ask, do you choose solitude, or are you hiding inside of it? For some, isolation is not a preference. It is a defense mechanism. It is used as armor, a shield constructed to deflect rejection, judgment, or the inherent vulnerability that accompanies human connection. This is where the behavioral science becomes nuanced. Psychologist Abraham Maslow, famous for his hierarchy of needs, provided the definitive framework for understanding this dichotomy. He argued that healthy solitude must stem from a place of abundance, not scarcity. In a state of abundance, you enjoy being alone because you are already fulfilled. You have experienced meaningful connections. You possess the social skills to navigate the tribe, and you know you can return to them at will. In this context, you are not running away from people. You are running toward yourself. Contrast this with scarcity. Here, solitude is a retreat from a world that feels too sharp to touch. It is a bunker, not a sanctuary. So, how do you distinguish between the two? The answer lies in your internal vocabulary. Ask yourself why you prefer to be alone. If your answer involves words like recharge, create, think, or process, you are operating in the healthy zone of unsociability. You are using solitude as a tool for restoration. But if your internal answer involves words like safer, easier, or less painful, then we are dealing with a different psychological phenomenon. This does not mean you are broken. It does not mean you are wrong. But it does suggest that your solitude might be a fortress built out of fear rather than a garden grown for peace. It is a distinction worth exploring, perhaps with a professional, because the goal is autonomy, not avoidance. Part 4. The myth of completeness and the cultural mirror. If we zoom out from the individual brain and examine the collective narrative, we see a society obsessed with fusion. We are fed a steady diet of romantic mathematics that claims two halves make a whole. We speak of my better half. We tell each other, you complete me. We have constructed a mythology that views human beings as broken Lego pieces, drifting through existence in a desperate search for our matching brick. But the solitary individual challenges this entire architectural premise. They look at this narrative and reject it. They operate from a radical assumption. I am already a whole set. This is not arrogance. It is a superior form of self-awareness. Research conducted by Dr. Bella DiPaolo at the University of California, Santa Barbara, reveals a startling counterintuitive fact. Single people who embrace solitude often possess stronger, more diverse connections with friends, family, and their community than their coupled counterparts. Why? Because they are not trying to extract all their emotional needs from a single source. They are not clinging. They are choosing. They understand a crucial dynamic that the codependent mind misses. The quality of your solitude directly dictates the quality of your social presence. When you approach a relationship from a place of depletion, you are looking for a savior. But when you approach from a place of centered recharge, you bring your whole self to the table because you have already spent time feasting at your own. There is immense power in this autonomy. And interestingly, other cultures are light years ahead in recognizing it. In Japan, there is a specific term for this, hitori. It translates to alone time, but the cultural connotation is one of celebration, not pity. In Tokyo, you will find restaurants designed with solo seating booths, engineered specifically for the individual diner. You will find movie theaters with single seats that do not ostracize the occupant. They have even industrialized the concept with solo karaoke booths. Think about the profundity of that. They have transformed singing alone in a soundproof box into a legitimate, respected social activity. Meanwhile, in the West, we still view dining alone as a tragedy. We treat the question, "Why are you eating alone?" as if it were an interrogation at a support group for the socially fallen. This cultural dissonance highlights a flaw in our perception, not in your behavior. The ability to exist comfortably with oneself is not a social failure. It is, perhaps, the ultimate form of social independence. Conclusion. The sovereign self. So, what is the final verdict for the solitary soul? If you are someone who finds restoration in the quiet, consider this your biological permission slip. You are not a social error. You are not a deviation from the norm. You are simply a specialized instrument. Your brain is literally wired to find its equilibrium in the absence of noise. And in a world that is drowning in constant connectivity, where the expectation is to be perpetually available, the ability to genuinely enjoy your own company is perhaps the most countercultural act you can perform. The world does not just need more chatter. It needs people who can sit with themselves. It needs minds that can think deeply without the crutch of constant stimulation. It needs individuals who know the profound difference between connection and codependency. The next time the world asks why you are alone, why you canceled the plans, or why you chose the silence of a book over the chaos of a party, you could explain the neuroscience. You could lecture them on dopamine sensitivity, prefrontal cortex activation, and the art of hitori. Or you can simply smile, secure in your own sovereignty, and say, "Because I like myself." And honestly, that is the only explanation you will ever need.